Welcome to another episode of Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded, where we focus on God, family, and country. You are here today with your hosts, Paris, Scott, and Shane. All three of us are in the studio today, the virtual studio. We're excited to be here and share some ideas with you about tents and shelters. But before we get into that, I just want to remind everybody to go to our website at preppertalkradio.com and check out our resources that are available there. Join our Facebook page and also our Facebook group, Emergency Prep and Self-Reliance, where we share a lot of great information as well. Join our email list so you're aware of anything that we do, any special projects that we're working on, and information. We're trying to get more regular at sending out emails. Also, please remember, with all the flu season coming up and the other, word that we can't say on YouTube without getting demonetized or problematic, the things coming this season, go and get your Jace Medical supplies. Jace Medical, your off-grid pharmacy. Go to jacemedical.com and get your antibiotics there. They actually just added ivermectin. And for those of you who know what ivermectin does, you'll know what I'm talking about what's coming up. They're trying to do another round of nonsense. And so make sure you get your Jace Medical ivermectin. Use code PREPPERTALK to get $10 off there. So today's episode, we're going to talk about tents specifically, and we may venture into other types of shelters that are available on the for survival and whatnot. So just a ton of information. There's a lot of different types of tents. So we're going to get into that discussion today on this show. What have you guys been thinking about as we pick this topic? What have you guys been thinking about the different types of tents that are available and what we can share?
Honestly, I keep going back to emergency situations. Why are you using a tent, right? Yeah. And also looking at what do you pack with yourself, like with your gear. If I'm trying to get home, like my get home bag, I don't have a tent in there. I'm never going to put a tent in there.
Right.
It is absolute insanity to try to carry a tent in my get home bag. And that is because they're heavy, they take up a lot of space, and they slow you down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna in that I'm just gonna carry, like, I've got my blankets and I've got bivy bags and I've got a regular blanket. I got plenty of shelter, right? The shelter in those scenarios is just to keep you dry and the wind from just cutting right through you.
You can do a makeshift tent with a poncho, with a really good quality poncho, which is something you should have in your bag anyways, in case of weather issues. And you can make really good.
I have a poncho tarp, so
nice.
It does double duty. But when it comes to, like, why are you looking at tents? That's more for, hey, the power went out. It's the middle of winter. How do I keep my house warm? Well, don't think about your whole house. Think about what room can we get in and how can we minimize our footprint. But also, like, adventure. Like, if you just want to go have fun, what kind of tent do you want to have for that? And then also, like, in a bug out scenario, what kind of tent are you going to throw in the back of the car?
Yep.
That's kind of what, like, led me to this discussion.
Yeah, and that's kind of also the same for me, Scott, is that for me, it's more of my experience of backpacking and camping and so forth, whether car camping or actually backpacking into the backcountry. Like you say, I don't carry a tent with me in my bug out bag. It's impractical. I want to move quickly. It's more of a get home bag, because that's kind of my orientation in my go bag. And I carry a small bivy or emergency blanket in addition to Gore-Tex jacket and so forth. That's my shelter. But yeah, when it comes to tents, I of course am more oriented toward let's buy this tent so I can use it every day, or I can use it multiple times during the year, not just in an emergency situation, because right. At that point it can be used for really anything. And so my decision is oriented more toward quality and durability and lightweight for those backpacking trips, that I can also set up that tent in the living room or in a bedroom, like you say, for conserving heat in the winter.
Yeah.
It was interesting a couple of years ago. Well, might be a lot longer ago now. There was a big push for these canvas tents, and there's a definite place for canvas tents. I just don't think that it's as common of a usage as most people think. Canvas tents are for long term. If you're going to be out in the weather for a long period of time, it's almost like a portable house, if you will, those canvas tents, because you don't want to set them up and take them down just for a weekend. You want, those are the kind of tents you put up for, if you're going to be out in a bug out situation for weeks or months, even.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, go ahead.
Or is it as a like a deer camp for extended for weeks if you're going to have that deer camp
Yeah.
and tent up for weeks. That's something that around here I've seen mostly the canvas tents used for. You just put the wood stove in there. You've got that convenience. You've got a full height tent. You can put tables. You can put cots in there. It's just much more convenient for more regular use rather than crawling in and out of a small dome tent or what have you that way. So
as well, if you're going to be in a very serious weather location, for example, if you're going to be, maybe it is a shorter term answer for like really extreme weather. If you're going to go climb a mountain or something like that's all snowed in, and you'll want to have a more robust tent than the typical, 2-man, 4-man tent. Yeah. So if you're going to go and cross the Antarctic or something, then you're going to probably want to have a canvas tent.
But then you're going to want to need a permit, and you're going to get an approval from all the countries who've signed the Antarctic Treaty. Like, it's going to get crazy at that point.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And at that point, I don't think a canvas is the right tent to take. You'll want to take a high-tech, fairly lightweight 4-season tent. So, there's the distinctions between 3-season, 4-season. Pretty much any tent, even you can get at Walmart for $30 or $40, which I don't recommend unless that's the only tent you're going to set up in your house, right? Because it's just not going to last very long. Getting in and out of it, handling the wind and weather. The poles are inexpensive, and the fabric and the quality just of construction is low. Yep. But for the money, for a weekend camp, sure, Walmart tent might be just fine for you. And maybe for an emergency situation, it seems like that's kind of the tent of choice for homeless, obviously, because they're inexpensive, and when it wears out, you just go get another one.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so the justification for price, like a good 3-season tent. I have one 4-season tent, but I never use it because it's on the heavy side. It's made for heavy winds, but it's made for heavy snow as well. And I'm not much of a snow camper anymore. So a good quality 3-season tent is going to fill a lot of needs, and you can get them very expensive, very ultra lightweight, which if you're going backpacking, ultra lightweight is great, but man, they get expensive.
Yeah, they do. Well, like ultra lightweight backpacks are like $250, $300,
$400, $500.
The tents are like $500-$600, like entry point for a one man. Like it's ridiculous, and it's really no bigger than a bivy bag. Like when you start with the single man ones, but you're 100% right. Like your 4-season tent is a rare need,
unless you're you go on expeditions, right? Unless you have the specific need. Like you said, I'm going to go climb this mountain. I'm going to go fast and light, and I need a 4-season tent in case the storm comes in.
I went camping with a group years ago. Like this is like 20 years ago, and one of the guys had bought these military surplus tents that basically you fold out the frame, and then you put the tent over the top, and then also another tent liner on the inside. And it got really cold while we were camping, but we didn't notice. It had everything you needed to. You could put a stove in there if you needed to, but we had like 20 people in this tent. It was huge. There's those big sectional tents. Have you guys seen those? What I'm talking about? But you can set up like 3 sections, 4 sections, 10 sections. But he had one of those, and it took us to put up the 2 sections. It took us 5 hours.
What?
So it's not an efficient way. Like it's a long term. Like if you're putting that tent up, that's where you're staying for a long time. Like this is home base. Like we're rebuilding. Like everything's demolished, and we got to put a tent up. That's the kind of tent you want for that, right? It becomes a command center. But like for me, a 3-season tent does great in almost every scenario. And if I need to do winter, I'm not going to buy a 4-season tent, even though I have a 4-season tent. I've got an old military surplus pole tent. It's got a single mast pole in the middle, and then you got to stake down everything out in the corners. And I have a stove that comes with it.
Kind of like a teepee. Kind of like a teepee tent.
Kind of, but it is square.
Oh, okay.
But it has a center pole in the middle, and then it squares out. And then in one corner, I've got a flap and a flue for my stove, and we've got those stackable cots that we can put up against the wall, and we can fit 5-6 people in there, no problem. Everyone will have their own bed, and they'll be nice and toasty. But I'm like, again, and it's got an insulation wall in internal tent type thing.
So it sections off each part of the tent.
No, it does not section off. It's a
It's a-
secondary layer.
It's a multi-layer, right? So
It's
you
a
have
wool wall
Oh, it's
that
that
within
goes
the.
around the entire inside.
Oh, got
And
it.
that's great and all, but it's also horrible because it takes forever to set these things up.
Yeah, it takes 5
It's
hours.
a
That's
long-term
ridiculous.
scenario. But my little Coleman, I love this tent. I don't know if I've shown you guys this tent, but it's a instant tent.
just a pop-up tent.
And it's not it goes up literally in less than 60 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
The legs are spring loaded, so when you pull them out, they'll articulate and pop up and then cause its own tension so that you're good to go. And dude, we can sleep 7 people in there if we have to. But like we set that up in the house when we do emergency drills. We also set it up in the house when the kids want to just have a fun sleep overnight with cousins.
Mm-hmm.
But we've taken it camping a number of times. We've been in some high winds and it's been no problem. We had a big dome tent that the high winds actually snapped all of our rods.
Wow.
So all the poles that go everywhere, every which way, like 3 out of the 4 poles snapped because the winds were so high. And we were camping in the same place with this tent, no problem. We had the same winds, no problem.
Yeah, that's a big problem with your cheaper tents, with your taller, call them a cabin tent, where you can actually walk into it, especially if it's an inexpensive tent like you get at Wally World, right? It's going to be tall, but when the wind comes, even 10, 15, 20 mile an hour winds can wreak havoc with those really inexpensive tall tents. So you might consider with a lower profile tent that you crawl into. I know, my wife hates those types of tents. She likes to be able to stand up and be able to change, rather than laying down in your sleeping bag and changing you there. It's much better for storms. And I feel so much more secure in a tent that has more of a dome shape that you can angle toward the wind, that is low profile, that stands by itself, that you don't have to have anchors to support it, right? And like those big cabin tents, you have to have some pretty big anchors of whatever kind, to support the corners of that tent, or it collapses. And so I prefer a self-supporting tent that way, which then you can anchor down to keep it from blowing away when you're not there, when there's if it's empty.
I went camping this last summer with or just a few months ago with this youth group at our church, and the church bought tents, and they bought not the full-blown canvas ones that you'd see in survival stores, but they had some canvas ones with some nice zipper ones, and they had the spring bar, and it was nice. It was actually a kind of a rectangle, and it was set up fairly quickly. I actually set up. It took 3 or 4 boys plus me pointing direction, doing a little bit of work to get them all organized, but they got it set up, and actually I set up my own tent, which is like an 8-man, just a big room, 8-man tent. I set that one up all by myself because it was more like what you're talking about with this spring loaded stuff. And so some of the tents were, I think one of the big things about those canvas tents or the cloth tents is that they're going to keep the warmth a little better. So you can, once you're inside there and zipped up, you're going to keep it warm from the elements. The tent that I used, I ended up having a little buddy heater inside of it that I turned on and let it rip because I wanted to stay a little warmer. So interestingly enough, I bought a tent for my family, and we have 7 at the time. We had 7 people living in the house, and 2 of my kids now live elsewhere, and I got a third one that's looking at getting married soon too. So I'm slowly whittling down to my own, just a few of us left here. And so, but years ago, I was in California, and I ordered a 7-man tent with 3 rooms. It had like a room for the kids, a middle room, and then it had a room for my wife and I. And they wouldn't ship to California because of some stupid rules. And I was like, are you kidding me? So I actually had it shipped to my buddy in Washington.
This tent is known by the state of California to cause cancer.
Or something dumb. It was so
everything
dumb.
causes cancer in California. Like
I'm going to share something here in a minute about California, but I had a buddy of mine get it in Washington. And then in Washington, he drove it down because he was coming down anyways. And so he drove it down. But it was just like, what? And so I've used this tent for years, and it's really not, it's huge. I don't want to, it's not one that I use every time I go camping anymore because I don't have a big enough family for it. But the other tent was really easy and nice. But let me show you this funny thing from Babylon Bee about tents. I think you'll like this. Let me just see if I can bring it up real quick. So if you're watching here, this is a Babylon Bee puts out newlyweds in San Francisco looking for a nice 1-bedroom, 0-bath starter tent. I mean,
It's about all people
Isn't
can
it?
afford anymore,
yeah. So
especially
it's
in
funny.
San Francisco. But yeah, I think a tent makes it for a great emergency shelter for your backyard. You know, if there's an earthquake and your structural integrity of your house is in question, there you go, set up a tent in your backyard. And like you
And
do, Scott, is just take the kids for some practice. You know, don't necessarily need to go out miles from home to put up a tent and camp, which is nicer, but you know, put it up in the backyard and pretend.
another thing too that might be nice for that having multiple tents is that if you have relatives that maybe their property was damaged even worse than yours, maybe you have yours was okay and they need to come, and you know it's nice to have people in the house when they need to be, but when they don't, they can sleep
Yeah.
in the tents outside and kind of fill up the yard, and that might be an opportunity. I don't, I just that's a great thing in an emergency if you're coordinating it and you're aware of it. But man, a lot of these cities right now that are being overrun with immigrants are getting to the point where they're going to need to put some people someplace.
Well, I even heard in Silicon Valley, real estate prices were so crazy at one point, and probably still that way, obviously, that there were people actually renting out tents in their backyards for
Like
people to rent
Airbnb?
on a short term. Yeah, like an Airbnb, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
crazy stuff.
crazy.
You know,
I just think like when people start thinking about like the functionality of a tent versus their house, like, oh, if we have to go somewhere, we'll bug out, we'll take a tent. It's like, if you're not bugging out to another building, you're crazy. Like the whole idea of bugging out and like jumping into a tent and living like a homeless person intentionally, I think that's a bad plan. I think that's a horrible plan. And it's like, okay, maybe you could get away with it if you're in San Francisco or the outskirts, or maybe you can get away with it part of the year in Arizona and in some parts of the states, Southern California, like where the climate's okay that you could live in a dome tent, right, and be homeless. But I'm thinking, man, tents are nice to go camping in, but do I want to camp 24/7?
No.
I've got to have a tall structure, like, so that's why I bought a enclosed trailer, just a utility trailer, and it's got a 6.5 foot clearance on the inside. It's 8 feet wide, and it's 12.5 feet long. And it's got back doors that close and open, and it's got a side door that closes and open.
nice.
And I've used that to camp in.
Same.
But all of our, like, if we got to roll heavy and just leave, all of our stuff's in these big, huge plastic bins, and I can just put them back outside, and we can sleep on the inside of the trailer, even long term. I mean, it's tall enough you can change in. It's got plenty of room to sleep, all of us. We've got mattresses we can throw down. Like, that is a better solution long term than a tent.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I've done a number of times already. I've got an enclosed trailer like yours as well. And we put up 2 cots in there and a table and some chairs. And it's a great place to camp. It's really quite nice, other than just having an RV. And I've seen a lot of people actually take enclosed trailers and convert them into RVs, into campers. And
I love those stealth camper ones.
It's a multi-purpose, vehicle, and we use it for a lot of different things. Haul our toys in it, and then sleep in it, rather than have an RV that has a toy hauler, right? And you get into the very expensive, trailers. But I was also thinking
we did that for a while. It was a bad idea. It was a horrible idea. Let me expound. My wife and I, we were like, hey, let's get a trailer that we can use for kind of our halfway house type of thing, like if we have to live in it for a little while or whatever, but also as like our bug out. And she's like, well, we need more stuff to be able to fit in there, so we need a travel trailer and a toy hauler. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, we got to be able to take everything with us. I'm like, you're missing the point. But she talked me into it. We bought this 24-foot toy hauler, and it had 2 beds, which is great, tons of room to sleep, a little bathroom and and a kitchen, but if you try to get all the stuff in there that you want to get in there, you're easily maxing out the weight on those things. Unless you're buying like a 28-foot plus fifth wheel toy hauler, like it was a bad idea.
Wow.
And it was so hard to move places. Like we took it camping a couple times and we're just like, no, this isn't worth it.
Big. Well, I think for me is a good idea is to keep a tent in my rig. And so if you get stranded, it's no fun to try and sleep in your seat, in a driver's seat, right? It's just not very good for sleeping. So throw a tent out, sleep in the tent, pack it back up, and that way you're not living in your vehicle. You got a nice place to sleep, especially if you're trying to get from point A to point B. And imagine if you're out somewhere and you can't find a hotel room, but you got a tent in the back of your rig and back of your trunk or whatever. Throw that thing up and you got a temporary shelter for the night.
Yeah, keep you dry, keep the wind off.
Yeah, and you can even throw air mattresses in the back of the car, like the little camp ones. You don't have to have anything huge, but then it gives you a sense or level of comfort. Like you always say, like go heavy, or when you've got your rig, go heavy.
Fill it up.
Just you've got plenty of space, and it's the change or the difference in fuel efficiency of an extra 150 pounds is really not going to do any difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to harm you.
From a financial perspective, folks who are worried about the finances, I would say start with, the size of a tent that would fit your family right now, and then fill it, gradually. A lot of these big canvas tents are easily $2,000, $3,000 plus dollars. And that's just if that's all your money, you just blew it on a tent. Now you don't have any money for cots or stoves or everything else. And so that's why it's like, don't get necessarily the cheapest thing at Wally World. Get onto Amazon, get something good, or, someplace, there's some good.
Spend $150
and get a nice tent
to get a good, decent 3-season tent. You can make do in the winter if you have to with a 3-season tent.
Yeah, you can throw some things up there to kind of bolster it with a tarp or other things like that. Tarps are cheap. Get a nice big tarp, as well to go with it. Just because it's not just about the tent. It's about what you need to keep the tent. For example, a lot of people don't want to put anything on the ground if they put a tent. Well, you need to have a ground cover, and then you need to put the tent on top of that. Usually some tents have these built-in things now at the bottom, and I don't really trust them. Maybe they're good. I don't know. If you know anything more than I do about it, just put a comment in the below and let us know. But I think that you have to have a tarp and then a tent, and then you can even put stuff around it if you need to. There's lots of things you can do to bolster a tent if you need to. And so just start with what you can financially and then build from there. If you get to the point where you have enough money that you can afford those big canvas tents because you're going out and really going to utilize it, go for it. But Scott, didn't we have a friend that was doing the big canvas dome tents, and there was a frenzy about them, and then all of a sudden people are like, hey, nobody wanted them anymore, and people are now trying to sell them for a fraction of the cost to get rid of them because they were just not as functional as
there's a couple different companies that did that. A lot of, like, when Trump got elected, a lot of the prepping companies went under. The ones that had just gotten into it because they were afraid of the Hillary Clinton era that might come in, right? And so a lot of people bought all these huge tents, and now they're trying to sell them and liquidate them, like geodesic domes. Don't get me wrong. Like when I worked with Vital Domes consulting for them, they had a 24-foot diameter and a 16-foot height in the middle.
And that's
awesome
a PVC,
structure.
Right? That was a PVC type material.
It's a polyvinyl shell.
Polyvinyl chloride.
Yep. And then the nice thing about it is you could zip out one of the sections and replace it with a sun window. So you can have like this 14-foot long window across one side. And that's nice because then it actually works as a sun oven and toasts you up pretty well all day long.
Like a greenhouse.
Yeah. And they even had a greenhouse cover that you could do. So like as a shelter, it was huge and it was awesome, but it took good 5 hours to build. Wow. Once you were good at it, you could do it in about 3. But if you're brand new, it's probably an 8-hour ordeal. So it's not like, hey, inclement weather, the house isn't safe, let's go outside and put up a tent. That's not the tent to put up.
Yeah.
But it's an awesome thing to be able to put up. And they even had liners for the inside. But like when Trump got elected, business shut down for him.
Wow.
And I haven't really seen too many of those being sold, but like I saw a whole lot of other tents being sold, especially the thing with these is like it's a good 500 pounds for that tent, for that dome.
Yeah,
So you're not just going to throw it in the back of your Corolla and drive around.
Yeah, you need
It's
a
not going to fit.
trailer for that specifically.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're going to load up the whole back of your truck or a trailer. And as a long-term solution, it's great. As a short-term and intermediate, horrible idea.
And
Yeah.
they hold up very well to high winds and heavy snow loads and such. So they are
Yeah.
good. So if you had a bug out property, and you needed a shelter and you couldn't afford to build something, right? I think these were several $1,000s at some
Yeah.
point, weren't they?
The cool thing is you could, with his sales, you could get into one for around $2,500.
Okay.
The base model.
So you could, yeah.
And I'm like, dude, that's crazy when he do a sale. But he did sales all the time. But like the full dome typically started around $5,000.
Wow.
And there's other companies out there like F Dome that builds really good ones. And they build theirs more for commercial use for like Airbnb and stuff like that. And that's great. And one of the clients that we worked with actually bought his and set it up in the Uintas, which are the mountains here in Utah. And he leaves it up year round. He built his own door connection. And so he's got a locking front door to it, and he goes up to it on the weekends.
Oh, that's cool.
And he was like, I left it all winter, and it was a rougher winter. Wasn't this last year? It was a few years, it was like 6 years back. He left it all winter and didn't go up, and it survived the snow. Now, if he'd have left it up last winter and didn't look at it at all and check on it, it wouldn't have survived the snow. We had record snow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to see what he did, if he took it down or if he went up and cleared off the snow. But you're going to have to clear off the snow on these because snow is heavy.
Yeah, especially if it
Right.
starts packing up.
But if you build warmth on the inside, the outside, it's going to melt the snow, and the snow is going to run down the sides and run out, hopefully. But again, you've got to have a good floor cover, and they sell those as an upgrade. And otherwise, you can just use a tarp or a couple tarps. But again, it goes back to it's not a quick solution.
Mm-mm.
It's an
But it could be a good
long-term type thing.
Exactly. It could be a good medium term solution. So that there are some resorts in southern Utah called Under Canvas. Have you heard of those? It's a resort, it's a camping resort, and they have
Okay.
multiple canvas tents that you just would rent like a hotel room. And
Yeah,
that's
they've
cool.
actually got a wooden floor that they've built, a
Mhm.
wooden platform.
yeah, like a deck or concrete deck or wood
Yeah.
deck. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely. It makes for, I think, a good bug out shelter, even maybe a long term shelter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you have a
triple up.
property that's somewhere, you can put it out there and just leave it there and you go to it. Have
Yeah,
some
and-
food storage in there. Make sure you
Yeah.
got a way to close it off and lock it up.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and
you
keep
don't
it
want to leave it
secure.
up year round. Like any tent, like the weather's going to. The problem with canvas is it'll degrade within a year or two if you leave it
Oh.
up year round.
The sun.
Canvas is a short term solution or a long term solution if you're there all the time.
Yeah.
And if you're there all the time, then you can do treatments for it and stuff like that. Because like there's a company called Bare Bones. I'm going to totally throw them under the bus here.
Mm-hmm.
But they built these tents, and they're like, "Oh, these are the best tents." And a company I knew bought like 50 of them for Airbnb down in Mexico, and they didn't last half a year
What?
because the sun. They were right off the beach. The sun, the salt water, and the sand destroyed these
Wow.
tents. So then they bought some of these polyvinyl tents, and those they did fine year round. The threading that they use for these and the heat sealing they use for these, it's designed to withstand the sun. It's designed to withstand the wind. And so like when you're looking at different things, like the PVC tents and domes and stuff like that, that fabric's designed to go 7 years.
Mhm.
Well, they use that PVC for like covering stadiums and such. So it's really
Yeah,
meant
it's the
for
same
long
thing
term.
for stadiums. It's the same thing for the truckers. You see those big, huge trucker tarps that will cover big things. That's
Mhm.
PVC tarps, and they're like 3 to 5 millimeters. Like they're thick, and so depending on what you're using it for, I mean that stuff can last a long time. It's designed to last a long time. Whereas if you've got a canvas tent, it's going to degrade in the sun. The sun's going to kill it.
Mhm.
It's going to get brittle. You also have to re-waterproof it if you're out there too long. Like, so you need to know how to care for, and this is important. You need to know how to care for whatever you end up buying.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think
But if you're going to go for long-term shelter, don't go with a tent. Get a shed if you have
Right.
to and drop it on your
yeah,
property
no, absolutely,
somewhere.
absolutely. Well, another solution, thing that I tried for a little while was a rooftop tent. I got one from my Forerunner for a little while, and of course that's all the rage now is the overlanding, right? Everybody who buys a Tacoma or Forerunner, whatever, they want to make it look like they're overlanders, that they're cool, that they go off out into the outback, because in the U.S. we have so much outback, right?
Mhm.
Especially compared to Australia, where the real outback is, right? So they'll put these rooftop tents on. Some have a clamshell, some are covered in a bag essentially, and super. I mean, I would say that's pretty convenient. Some are pretty easy to set up. Some take a while, but I mean, it's always there. It's always ready.
Yep.
The reason I didn't keep mine is it makes the vehicle kind of top heavy, and the way I like to drive the Forerunner, it just didn't make a lot of sense. So I ended up selling it, but it is super convenient. And in an emergency, you jump in, you throw your stuff in, you go. Your tents are already there. So I think it does make a lot of sense just to keep a tent in the back of your vehicle for those emergencies.
I was watching
Yeah.
I think it was a reel on Instagram. I subscribe to a lot of the preparedness stuff, and some guy had this trailer. It was like a tent, but it was a trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that it was crazy because it kind of like was a transformer. Like it seemed like this little pod that he was carrying, pulling on the back of, and then all of a sudden it's like, like it opened up into all these crazy things. And it was a bigger thing. And all these, some engineer was brilliant and went out and just designed this thing. It was like a smaller trailer, but then it had like all these jacks and then it had all this stuff that opened up into this much bigger tent where it could fit 3 or 4 people in it. And I was like, that's brilliant. Probably expensive, but it's brilliant. And because that's the other thing too, is that we've talked about it kind of, indirectly, that if you're going to have a tent, you have to pack it something. You have to have a way to transport it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're dragging it, that's one of the reasons why I bought a trailer. I bought one of those, lawnmower, mow and go kind of trailers that's open on the top, but it has the gate that comes down in the back, because I knew I needed to be able to have enough stuff. If I have most emergencies, thankfully, you're going to have a few hours at the, to be able to plan and get out. And so I realized I have a SUV. I just throw my trailer on the back and throw my stuff into that trailer. And I have it all organized so that I could do it, probably get my trailer packed up in an hour, 2 hours max, and then we're out.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to have some way to really transport that. And so whether you get a trailer or whether you buy one of these cool pod tent, campers, you got to have something to shelter yourself for whatever emergency might come around. Because that's having a shelter is one of the major key things. Like food, water, and then shelter is the next thing. You got to, what's the rule of 3? You can't
And that's the thing,
3 hours in inclement weather.
Shelter, food, water. Yeah.
Shelter,
water, food. Shelter, water, food.
Yeah, because you're not going to be able to withstand 3 hours of inclement weather without a shelter. Whether that's a fire, whether that's a vehicle, whether that's a lean-to, like whether that's your coat, because you've got nice, good quality stuff and tarps and other stuff. Like, you've got to be able to improvise as well. And like, I think everyone needs to go out and learn how to build lean-tos with tarps.
Absolutely. And of course, the key is in the backcountry, especially in the winter, the 3 rules are stay dry, stay dry, stay dry. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you can do that by sitting in your car all the time, but then, man, that gets old pretty quick. But one thing I was just thinking, I think it's better, at least in my case, to have multiple smaller tents than one big, huge tent.
Agreed.
Especially for the family, it gives a little more privacy to the younger ones, to the older ones, to mom and dad. Yeah, it's going to be more expensive, but you're going to have more redundancy that way. If there's emergency, you could all pack more into one tent. And it gives us more capacity for storing things. And I think overall, I think that's for us and our family, I think that's a better way to go, rather than one huge cabin tent, which again catches the wind, are typically lower quality. To get a really big, good quality one, man, you're spending a lot of money. And then it's heavy, and how do you transport it? A lot of things that way. So I think, like you say, Scott, spend $150, $200 on a good 3-man, maybe even 4-man tent, and get multiple enough to fit your whole family. And I think that for me, that's an ideal way to go. And you can split it up between vehicles as well. So
that's a really good point. Well, you've been listening to Prepper Talk Radio, radio for the ready-minded. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. We just want to remind you as well that in the economy, with the everything that's happening in the world right now, the dollar is collapsing. The value of the dollar is going down, and so we want to make sure that you're utilizing as many opportunities as you can to retain and maintain your wealth. Don't let inflation ruin your wealth. Get a store of value in gold and silver. Contact ITM Trading. So the website would be learn.itmtrading.com/Prepper Talk Radio, or call 1-866-257-0481 to get a free consultation as to whether or not gold and silver will be a good addition to your current portfolio. Make sure that you have some way to hedge against inflation and protect your wealth. And gold and silver is an excellent way to do that. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll talk to you on the next podcast.
See you next week.
See you.